Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're looking at some excerpts from John Ortberg's The Me I Want to Be, and we're hoping to uncover some insights on how we can all become our best selves.
And I think that can sometimes feel like a
Right.
daunting task.
Yeah.
This idea of becoming our best selves.
Right.
But what I love about Ortberg is he just does such a fantastic job of using these really relatable stories and examples to illustrate his points.
Like that one about the airport shuttle bus driver,
Oh, yeah.
who he describes as picking up passengers like they're discovering buried treasure.
Yeah.
And he's just creating this atmosphere of excitement and joy.
It's contagious, isn't it?
It is.
But, Ortberg argues that this driver isn't just a naturally cheerful guy.
Right.
He's actually demonstrating a really profound truth, that each of us is uniquely created to reflect God's joy
Okay.
in our own way.
So it's like we catch a glimpse of the person God intended us to be
Exactly.
in these little everyday moments.
Shining through these ordinary moments.
Yeah. So it's not just about finding a job we love,
Right.
but about bringing that same sense of purpose and joy to all aspects of our lives.
And I think what Ortberg emphasizes is that God doesn't create
Yeah.
cookie-cutter versions of good.
Right.
He takes our raw materials,
Right.
our personalities, our quirks, even our flaws,
Okay.
and redeems them, weaves them into this tapestry that's uniquely us.
I love that. He uses the example of Shauna, this strong-willed little girl.
Yes, the one
Yeah.
whose mom said, "You might as well spank me now because I've got places to go."
Yeah. Places to go. I had a few of those places to go moments myself as a kid.
But here's the thing, that same determination that maybe made
Yes.
Shauna a bit of a handful as a child
Mm-hmm.
transformed into her greatest strength as she matured.
Okay, yeah.
She became a natural leader, someone who could really rally people around a cause
So it's like God took that strong will
and directed it toward a purpose.
Yeah. So what I am hearing is we can look back at our lives and see clues.
Absolutely.
And maybe those moments where we surprised even ourselves by stepping up or by acting with unexpected courage.
Absolutely. Even the small moments.
Yeah.
Those moments offer us valuable insights
Okay.
into who God created us to be.
So it's like we're piecing together a puzzle.
Exactly.
And those flashes of our best selves
Yeah.
are like finding corner pieces.
Helping us see the bigger picture of our God-given potential.
It's not just about striving to be good. It's about discovering and embracing
Right.
the unique goodness that God has already placed within us.
To help us sort of understand this concept of who we're meant to be, Ortberg introduces this idea of the me spectrum.
Okay, let's unpack this. The me spectrum.
Yeah. He outlines 3 different me's that we often wrestle with.
Okay.
First one is the me I don't want to be.
Okay.
And that's those parts of ourselves that we try to hide or suppress.
Right.
The shadows we'd rather keep tucked away.
So it's like putting on a facade, trying to project this image that doesn't really reflect who we are.
Yeah, Ortberg compares this to like a lieutenant pretending to be on the phone with a general
Oh, wow.
just to impress a private.
I can see that. It can be exhausting trying to keep up that image.
And inauthentic.
Right.
But Ortberg argues that honesty, even about our less than desirable qualities,
Okay.
is crucial for growth.
Got it.
And then there's the me I think I should be.
Yeah.
This is where comparison traps us.
Right. We measure ourselves against others,
Yeah.
and we constantly feel like we're falling short.
Right. Like that busy mom who beats herself up because her prayer life
Uh-huh.
doesn't look like her pastor's perfectly peaceful morning routine.
Yeah, we've all been there trying to squeeze ourselves into a mold that wasn't made for us.
And that's where Ortberg's wisdom, I think, really comes in.
Okay.
He reminds us that God isn't looking for cookie-cutter Christians.
Right.
He delights in our individuality. He wants us to desire his plan for us, not just grit our teeth and obey out of obligation.
Which brings us to the most exciting me of all, the me I am meant to be.
Yes.
This is about uncovering the unique plan God has for each of us.
Yes.
Embracing those things that make us come alive.
Like think of Tim, who found redemption after struggling with addiction.
Okay.
Or Peter, who discovered freedom from the torment of unwanted sexual impulses.
Wow, that's powerful. But how do we even begin to grasp at this me I am meant to be?
Yeah.
How do we figure out God's unique plan for our lives?
Oh. Ortberg suggests paying attention to the things that light us up.
Okay.
Those activities that make us feel most alive.
Okay.
Think about your passions, your natural talents.
Yeah.
Even those quirky interests that make you, well, you.
Okay, so instead of trying to fit ourselves into some predetermined mold,
Right.
we should be looking for those clues that reveal our unique design.
Exactly.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting. Ortberg dives into the role of desire in our spiritual growth, and he makes a surprising argument. He suggests that desire isn't the enemy,
Okay.
but can actually be a powerful guide leading us closer to God.
Right.
Wait, so we don't have to suppress all of our desires?
Not necessarily. Think of it this way. Imagine two swimming students.
Okay.
One is driven by Olympic dreams, visualizing himself on the podium, feeling that burning desire for victory.
Okay.
The other is simply trying to please his father.
I can already guess who's going to push through those grueling early morning practices.
Exactly. The one fueled by desire.
Right.
And Ortberg applies this same principle to our spiritual lives.
Okay.
He argues that true growth isn't about suppressing our desires, it's about aligning them with God's.
Okay, that makes sense.
He tells the story of Chuck, a friend who finds God's presence
Okay.
in a rather unconventional place, the Waffle House.
The Waffle House, seriously?
Yep. Chuck loves connecting with people over breakfast, sharing stories, offering encouragement.
So it's not about forcing ourselves into these rigid religious activities,
Right.
but about finding God in the midst of our authentic desires.
Exactly.
So the question becomes, what are your authentic desires? Where do you sense those sparks of passion and purpose igniting within you?
Those desires, the ones that resonate with your deepest sense of self, could be clues to how God wants to work in your life.
Okay.
Weaving those passions into a tapestry that reflects His glory.
This is starting to make sense. It's not about denying who we are, but about surrendering to God's transformative work in our lives, allowing Him to shape our desires and redirect them towards His purpose.
Now, speaking of surrender,
Yeah.
that's another key piece of the puzzle.
Okay.
When it comes to becoming our best selves, Ortberg emphasizes that surrender isn't about weakness
Okay.
or giving up.
Right.
It's about making a powerful choice.
Okay. So surrender not as waving the white flag, but more like choosing to trust the GPS, even when it takes us on a back road we've never been on before.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Ortberg uses this really vivid analogy of riding in a car with a friend who loves to speed.
Okay.
As the car is accelerating, Ortberg finds himself instinctively pressing down on an imaginary brake pedal.
Oh, wow.
It's that human impulse to want to grab control even when we know it's not helpful.
It's that feeling of wanting to slam on the brakes when life feels out of control instead of trusting that maybe, just maybe, there's a smoother ride ahead.
And surrender, in its truest sense, is about letting go of that need for control, allowing Jesus to take the wheel, so to speak. It's about trusting His plan, even when it feels uncomfortable or the road gets bumpy.
But that can feel so counterintuitive, especially in a society that tells us to grab the bull by the horns and be in charge, make things happen.
Yeah, it definitely requires a shift in mindset. But Ortberg reminds us that even Jesus wrestled with surrender. In the Garden of Gethsemane, facing the immense weight of what was to come, He prayed, "Not my will, but yours be done."
That's incredibly humbling to think about.
Yeah.
If Jesus, the Son of God, embraced surrender, surely we can learn to do the same.
Absolutely.
But how do we actually put this into practice? Because conceptually, it sounds great.
Right.
But practically speaking, it feels like a whole other challenge.
Well, Ortberg offers some really practical tools, pathways to help us on this journey of becoming our best selves.
Okay.
One that really resonated with me is try softer.
Try softer.
Yeah.
I like the sound of that. I think we can all use a little more softness in our lives, but what does that actually look like?
Well, it's this idea that spiritual growth isn't about gritting our teeth and striving in our own strength.
Okay.
It's about learning to relax into God's grace, to trust His timing, to be kind to ourselves in the process.
So how does that play out in real life?
He tells this hilarious story about his first yoga class. Now, picture this Ortberg, not exactly known for his flexibility.
Right.
Finds himself surrounded by people who seem to bend in ways that defy human anatomy.
Okay, this I've got to hear.
He describes watching a woman effortlessly slide into the splits, fold herself in half, and then get this, tie her legs around her head.
Okay, that's impressive even for a yoga pro.
It's a funny image, but it highlights a profound truth.
Yeah.
Sometimes trying harder can actually be counterproductive, especially in our spiritual lives.
Right.
It can lead to self-righteousness, a focus on outward performance, rather than genuine heart change.
So it's not about lowering our standards or becoming complacent.
Right.
It's about recognizing that true transformation happens through God's grace, not through our own white-knuckled effort.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Try Softer is about surrendering that need to control the outcome, to be perfect, to have it all figured out.
Right.
It's about learning to lean into God's grace and allowing Him to work in us, even in our imperfections.
That's a message I think we all need to hear. So besides trying Softer, what are some other pathways Ortberg suggests for spiritual growth?
Another one he emphasizes is think great thoughts.
Think great thoughts.
He reminds us that our minds are incredibly powerful. The thoughts we dwell on shape our perceptions, our emotions, even our actions.
I've heard that before about the power of positive thinking, but sometimes it feels like those negative thoughts have a mind of their own, constantly swirling around, dragging us down.
Well, Ortberg addresses this by using this analogy of a lingering skunk smell.
Okay.
At first, it's overwhelming, but eventually you get used to it.
Right.
You might not even notice it anymore.
But that doesn't mean it's not affecting you.
Right. And the same goes for negative thoughts.
Yeah.
We can become so accustomed to them that we don't even realize they're shaping our reality, influencing our choices, and hindering our spiritual growth.
So think great thoughts is about being intentional about what we're feeding our minds.
Exactly.
Replacing those mental skunks with something more life-giving. But where do we find those great thoughts amidst all the noise and negativity bombarding us every day?
Well, Ortberg offers several sources. Scripture, of course, is a rich source of truth and encouragement.
Yeah.
He suggests finding passages that speak to us, maybe even memorizing them so we can recall them when those negative thought patterns start to creep in.
So it's like building an arsenal of truth to combat those mental battles we all face?
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be just Scripture.
Okay.
We can also find inspiration in nature art music, even in the stories of people who embody those qualities we admire. Courage, kindness, perseverance.
So it's about being mindful of the input we're allowing into our minds.
Yes.
Recognizing that our thoughts have a direct impact on our spiritual well-being.
Now, here's another pathway Ortberg suggests, and it's one that might surprise you. Let your talking flow into praying.
Okay, that sounds interesting. Tell me more.
He starts by pointing out how much we talk.
Okay.
To others in front of others, and let's be honest, sometimes about others.
Guilty as charged. But how do we turn all that talking into something more meaningful, something that connects us with God?
He suggests that we can make our conversations more prayerful. It's not just about setting aside formal prayer times, but about bringing that same spirit of prayer into our everyday interactions.
It's like a constant dialogue with God woven into the fabric of our lives.
Exactly.
But how do we practically do that?
Well, he challenges us to pause before we speak, especially when we're tempted to gossip, complain, or tear someone down.
Okay.
And he asks us to consider, where will this conversation lead? Is it edifying? Is it truthful? Is it kind?
It's like having a filter for our words.
Right.
Choosing to speak in a way that honors God and builds up others.
Exactly. It's about inviting God's presence into our conversations, allowing Him to guide our words and shape our interactions.
This takes intentionality for sure.
It-
But it's so powerful to think about the ripple effect our words can have, either for good or for bad. Now, Ortberg also introduces this concept of flow blockers. These are like personal kryptonite, those areas where we're most vulnerable to temptation.
Yeah.
Those things that hinder our spiritual growth and prevent us from becoming our best selves.
This is where things get really personal.
Okay.
Ortberg argues that each of us has a signature sin, a temptation we're most susceptible to based on our personality and life experiences.
Okay.
He uses this funny example of a dog versus a cat to illustrate his point.
Okay.
When a dog knows it's done something wrong, it'll often cower, act ashamed, even refuse a treat.
Oh, I know that. Look, my dog gets those puppy dog eyes when he knows he's been caught red pod.
But a cat, on the other hand, never seems to repent.
Oh,
It's like they have no concept of guilt or shame.
I can see where he's going with this. Different creatures and different people respond to correction in different ways.
Exactly. So understanding our flow blocker isn't about condemning ourselves or wallowing in guilt. It's about recognizing our unique vulnerabilities so we can address them with God's help and find freedom from those patterns that hold us back.
So how do we identify our personal flow blockers? What are some of the common ones Ortberg outlines?
He identifies 5 primary ones: anxiety, greed, pride, anger, and complacency.
Okay.
Each of these flow blockers can manifest in different ways depending on our personalities,
Right.
but they all ultimately hinder our connection with God and prevent us from becoming the people He created us to be.
Wow, that covers a lot of ground.
Yeah.
So how do we know which one is our primary flow blocker? And
Yeah.
once we've identified it, How do we actually overcome it?
That's where the real work begins. And Ortberg offers some incredibly helpful and practical strategies for addressing each of these flow blockers. But we'll delve into those in our next deep dive.
All right, so let's dive into those strategies Ortberg provides for tackling these flow blockers. I'm especially interested in what he says about anxiety because, let's face it, we live in a world that seems designed to make us anxious.
Yeah, he doesn't sugarcoat it, does he? Ortberg acknowledges that anxiety is a very real struggle for so many of us. But instead of just telling us to calm down or think positive,
Right.
he offers a much more compassionate and, I think, practical approach.
Okay, I'm all ears. What's the antidote to this anxiety epidemic?
Well, he emphasizes the importance of bringing our anxieties to God in prayer. He reminds us that we're not meant to carry these burdens alone. He even uses this powerful phrase, never worry alone.
Okay.
It's like an invitation to share those worries with God, to pour out our hearts to Him, trusting that He cares and wants to help us.
That really resonates with me. You know, there's something so freeing about acknowledging our limitations
Yeah.
and surrendering those worries to a higher power.
It's like releasing those anxieties into God's capable hands,
Right.
knowing that He can handle them far better than we ever could.
Right.
And Ortberg doesn't just stop at prayer. He also encourages us to take direct action, to face our fears.
So it's not just about passively praying the anxiety away, but about actively confronting those things that trigger our anxiety.
He uses the example of learning to rock climb.
Hmm.
You can read all the books and listen to all lectures about the safety of the equipment, but until you actually get on the wall and start climbing, that fear won't fully subside.
So it's about taking those steps of faith, trusting that God will be with us even when we feel scared or uncertain.
It's about moving from fear to faith, one step at a time. Now let's shift gears and talk about greed.
Okay.
This flow blocker feels particularly relevant in our consumer-driven culture, where we're constantly bombarded with these messages telling us we need more, more, more.
It's like this feeling of never having enough, always wanting that next thing, that bigger house, that fancier car, the latest gadget. It's exhausting.
Yeah, Ortberg tackles this head-on. He really encourages us to shift our focus from acquiring more to cultivating contentment.
Okay.
He reminds us that true satisfaction doesn't come from possessions. It comes from a heart aligned with God's purpose.
And when we're focused on God's plan for our lives, those material desires tend to fade into the background.
Absolutely, and he suggests this interesting exercise.
Okay.
Imagine having 5 minutes to edit the script of your child's life. What would you erase? What would you change?
I think my first instinct would be to erase all the painful parts,
Mm-hmm.
the heartbreaks, the disappointments. I just want to protect them from all that.
That's natural, wanting to shield those we love from pain.
Mm-hmm.
But Ortberg challenges us to consider this. Would a life without those challenges truly lead to growth and maturity?
Right.
Would it equip them to navigate the complexities of life and develop resilience?
It's like we often want to protect ourselves and those we love from discomfort, but maybe those difficult experiences are actually shaping us into the people we're meant to be.
And refining us,
Yeah.
teaching us these valuable lessons, drawing us closer to God. Now, another flow blocker Ortberg discusses is pride.
Okay.
This one can be sneaky because it often disguises itself as confidence or self-reliance.
It's that I've got this mentality that can really keep us from acknowledging our need for God.
Yeah, and Ortberg encourages us to practice humility.
Okay.
To remember that all our gifts and talents ultimately come from God.
That's a good reminder. It's easy to take credit for our successes and forget that everything good in our lives
Look.
is a gift from God.
He tells this amusing story about being given the opportunity to take batting practice with the pitcher for Barry Bonds.
Oh, wow.
And Ortberg, feeling pretty confident, in his childhood baseball skills,
Right.
steps up to the plate and promptly whiffs, of course.
Yeah, of course.
He quickly realizes he's out of his league.
That's hilarious.
Sorry.
It's a good reminder that we all have our limitations,
Mhm.
and there's no shame in acknowledging them.
Humility isn't about putting ourselves down or denying our strengths.
Right.
It's about recognizing that we're all in this together, dependent on God's grace. Now, the next flow blocker, anger, can be particularly destructive.
Right.
Not only to our relationships, but also to our own inner peace.
Yeah, anger is definitely an energy zapper. It just drains us emotionally and spiritually.
Ortberg emphasizes the importance of forgiveness as the antidote to anger.
Mm-hmm.
He reminds us that holding on to anger
Right.
is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die.
Wow. That's a powerful image.
He also talks about the importance of turning the other cheek.
Okay.
Now, this doesn't mean being passive or letting people walk all over us.
Right.
It's about responding to insults and offenses in a way that disarms the situation and breaks that cycle of retaliation.
So it's about choosing love over anger, even when it's hard.
Exactly. It requires a lot of grace and self-control,
Yeah.
but it's the path to true freedom. Now, the final flow blocker Ortberg addresses is complacency.
Okay.
This one can be tricky because it often feels comfortable.
Right.
We get settled into our routines, our comfort zones,
Yeah.
and we lose that sense of urgency, that passion for growth.
It's that going through the motions feeling where we're not really engaged or challenged.
But this can lead to stagnation, a lack of spiritual vitality.
Right.
So how do we overcome complacency? Ortberg challenges us to step outside our comfort zones, to embrace challenges that stretch us and help us grow.
Okay.
He uses the example of Caleb, who, even at 85 years old,
Oh.
was still eager to conquer new territory.
It's like saying it's never too late to embrace new challenges and keep growing.
Exactly. It's that spirit of adventure, that willingness to keep pushing forward that Ortberg encourages us to cultivate. Now, as we wrap up our deep dive into Ortberg's book, The Me I Want to Be, it's important to remember one key point he emphasizes. Spiritual growth is not a solo pursuit. We need community.
We really do. We're not meant to do this life alone. We need each other for support, for encouragement, for accountability.
He reminds us that we're created for connection, to share our journeys, to learn from one another, and to spur each other on towards becoming our best selves.
So I think a good question for all of us to consider as we reflect on these insights is, who are those life-giving people in your life? Who are those friends, family members, mentors, or spiritual companions who challenge you, who encourage you, who help you become more like Christ?
And on the flip side, how can you be that source of support and encouragement for others? How can you be a catalyst for growth in your own sphere of influence?
And remember, you're not alone in this journey. We all have those areas where we struggle, those flow blockers that hold us back. But with God's grace and with the support of a loving community, we can overcome those obstacles and become the people God created us to be, those best versions that reflect His glory in unique and beautiful ways.